Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here at Ignite. Excited to be here talking about AI in the Microsoft ecoverse. My name is Heath.
I'm Dominick Raimato, and we're really excited to be here to talk about this topic. We're having these conversations all the time, aren't we, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that the technological landscape is just rapidly evolving. It's on a freight train and it keeps going. And we've firmly planted ourselves into what I like to call the era of enablement. We've moved away from digital transformation. Whether it's dead or it's moved, it's definitely evolved, right? And now what matters the most is people want that data. They want to take action on that data. And something that has taken front and center is Copilot for M365, and everybody wants to talk about it, and for good reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was about this time last year, we were talking about how crazy generative AI was coming and the anticipation of Copilot, and now it's finally here. A year later, we're in, and we're seeing the benefits of being able to leverage a large language model, not only on just data that's out there in the world and on the internet, but the data that's within our own Microsoft 365 environment. And that to me has been absolutely outstanding. And I think you know that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we have all this data out there. How can end users take a part of this data consumption, right? Use it and benefit from productivity gains, right? And I think Copilot for M365 is the base layer, being heavily integrated into Outlook, Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, Word, PowerPoint, the products that we use day to day to enhance that productivity. And we're seeing massive gains there, right?
Absolutely, but it's not happening by mistake. It's really having to be really purposeful about the change. I mean, one of the things that we often talk about when it comes to generative AI and Copilot specifically in Outlook is, I could save so much time in my inbox. But here's the problem. And I mean, because you and I are about the same age, we've been checking email now for about the same way for 30 some years? Yeah. It's been the exact same way. And it continues to be a necessary evil, if you will, in our workday. So leveraging tools like Copilot take a huge behavior change, and it takes a little bit of effort to start to see those productivity gains. And they don't show up necessarily up front necessarily in some of those traditional tools, but as people start to understand, I could do this in my inbox, they start to explore out to these other applications. And that's really where we're starting to see the value is that it's not just simply summarizing an email, but it's being able to go and generate a spec document off of notes from a meeting and content from an email that came in earlier in the week.
It's interesting that you should say that, because a lot of organizations I speak to come into the conversation thinking, okay, great. We know there's this thing called AI out there. We know Copilot for M365 exists. Let's just throw that at the loudest problem that we have and expect it to solve everything for us. And that's far from the case. Like you said, it really does take a conscious effort, behavior change, because we've entered that new era. There's a lot of things that we need to do today to embrace this technology that we haven't been doing before. And that's okay. We could get away with it then, but things have changed now. And if we really want to have those productivity gains, if we really want to benefit from what AI has to offer, we have to make that effort. We have to get better at things like prompt engineering, right?
Oh, absolutely. And even before you even get to the prompt engineering piece, I kind of like what you said, where you throw AI at the problem. We call it rubbing some AI on it, right? Just rub some AI on it, see what will happen, right? But they're doing it on bad data. They're not having the best experience. And that's the piece that I think everyone kind of forgets, especially when it comes to Copilot specifically, is that, we're using the data that's built into your ecosystem. But if it's dirty, if it's really of a poor quality, or there's a lot of confusion, you're not going to get the best experience. And I think that becomes the biggest challenge that our customers are starting to see, is that, for years, they maybe haven't maintained their Microsoft 365 ecosystem really well. So they've got a lot of clutter, they've got a lot of data, they've retained stuff maybe beyond what was really necessary. As a result, it's making it harder for the large language model to really get the best out of or get the best value out of the large language model as a result.
Yeah, I think data rot has become increasingly a huge issue here. And by rot, redundant, obsolete, transitory data that you mentioned there. Even so much like this was a something that was a recognized problem for us early on. In fact, to help with success of a tool like Copilot from 365. Talk about massive data, like it's a challenge to dig into your data estate like that and really get the view that you need, the visibility. I always say like, okay, well, what's the first thing you have to do when you're lost in the woods? Well, you got to figure out what your location is. And this has been a challenge, so much so that there has to be a technical approach to actually dig into this and offer that visibility of the landscape, right? With tools like Graph API and PowerShell, like actually having to go as a technical mechanism and find this information.
Yeah, and it's funny because years ago I was part of an enterprise search project, and everything looked good, right? Hey, look, we brought a bunch of systems together, we put into an enterprise search tool, and suddenly, what's the first thing people start to do? They search for their own names, and we found a couple things that popped out. Number one is we found people's pay stubs. There was a group of people that were working out of country. They were out for a period of time, and because of the length of time that they were out, they owed taxes to that federal government where they were working. So the company I was working for paid those taxes, but in order to do that, they had to keep all the pay stubs and all the records, and that folder was open to everyone in the organization. So you couldn't navigate there because everything was blocked to get there, but suddenly the new search index found that information, right? It's almost like that dark closet that's been hidden away. Maybe it's even your hallway closet. Like if I come to your house and I go to your, what am I going to find? Like I can tell you, you're not rummaging through my hallway closet because Lord knows what's in there, and right? Yeah. So we really need to spend some time in that data estate. And exactly what you said is that we sit down with our customers and we really dig in deep and get a forensic analysis, because one of the biggest challenges is, for some organizations, they've got so much data sitting out there. They've got, one customer we were working with, they have 26,000 SharePoint sites. 26,000.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's audit every site. Well, you're never going to audit every site. 26,000 sites, that's a lot of sites. But by going through and doing that analysis, what we've been able to do is work with customers to systemically manage them and say, okay, some of these sites are really old, so let's move them for archival instead, right? Let's figure out a way to archive them properly, whether they get deleted completely, maybe they get moved into more of a cold storage container to help reduce some costs and help manage access, or maybe we just strip the permissions off the sites. That's perfectly acceptable. It's just a matter of figuring out what's the right archival path there. Then we start to go through and say, okay, well, here's the highest risk sites. We're looking for indicators like how broadly is the site shared? Is there broken inheritance on the sites? And I get some pushback on that one, but keep in mind too, is broken inheritance done well works great, but not managed or not well done could end up being a disaster. And that's when that oversharing, that the pay stub issue was a great example of that oversharing, that nobody was managing that well. And we don't want to fall into that. So we need to figure out a way to get through those sites very quickly, so that way we can get people off the ground with Copilot.
Yeah. And I think that's the first step, right? The data cleansing, getting a better posture, asserting a better posture in your data state. That's the first step. But after that, right, here you have a tool. And with any tool, I think implementing AI in an organization, in the enterprise, can be expensive. So I think it's really important to understand a few things. But what we're seeing is that, there are different personas that are going to emerge over time when we're looking at, hey, how can this tool be valuable to the organization? So different personas. For instance, like, I'm in a lot of meetings. So for me, having Copilot in Copilot for M365 and Teams as my personal assistant, if I happen to be late or if I need to recall information and ask questions about my data throughout that meeting, I can do so. That's invaluable. You, Dom, you do a lot of content creation as well. So having Copilot for M365 in Word and in PowerPoint has been invaluable to you. So I think what people need to understand is that, like, there's different personas that emerge. And so capturing what those activities and roles and responsibilities are like beforehand, right, to be able to do some post-implementation assessment is really important. And I think you could agree, like, finding value at the individual level, at the business unit level, and the organization level has been really important as well.
So one of the things we always ask whenever we work with a customer, we ask about their time saved. What do you get with that? And I get a lot of things like, I'm actually able to focus on my job. Some jokingly say, I can now attend more meetings, all that kind of stuff. but you get some really great things. And I just saw recently, it was somebody actually said, I can get home and spend more time with my family.
Right.
I'm able to wrap up my day. I'm able to disconnect. And I have a better work-life balance because I'm able to disconnect at 5 o'clock and I can now go spend time with my family. Like, that's invaluable. There's no dollar figure we could put on that.
Focusing
but
on
that's
what
huge.
matters outside of work, too.
Right. Well, and that's really what is important at the end of the day, too, is, everyone's trying to do more with less. Everyone's getting stressed. Everyone's working late hours. You and I both know that very well. But anything that we could do with a tool that helps us bring that a little bit more in balance. I mean, like, I'm thinking about how crazy, with Copilot, if we didn't have Copilot to help us with Copilot engagements, my gosh, how crazy our lives would be. So very much appreciate that impact that is made for our customers and even on ourselves.
So I think there's a level of initial impact. You mentioned, this immediate improvement, but there's also long-term gains over time. And what's interesting here is that I feel like very much we're in the same boat as we were when Google and search engines hit, right? And so there's this new tool. It's changed the way we work, but we're not necessarily good at it yet. And so it's interesting to see how, I think everybody just assumes that as a society, we're good at AI. We know what to type in the box to get the result we want, but that's not always the case. And something we've talked a lot about Copilot for M365 here, but I don't want to make light of just Copilot. It used to be called Bing Chat Enterprise, been out there, Copilot in the browser. How much that's really benefited organizations in just early prompt engineering training, which is hugely important right now.
Yeah, I cannot begin to tell you how many customers I talk to that don't realize that they have it enabled today.
Yeah.
If you have a Microsoft 365 license and you're a knowledge worker, so you probably have at least like an E5 or an E3 license or, the equivalent, A5, A3, right? You have that experience today. So you have a safe place for people to leverage Copilot for public data, internet data, and being able to leverage that to build, to help them with their jobs today at no additional cost. So starting to use that one helps develop the prompt engineering skills that you need to be successful, but two, there's still gains.
We have sort of a base layer, and this is not a hierarchy, but when we think about tools in the ecoverse, Microsoft ecoverse, you've got Copilot for web, right? Being able to have that chat GPT-like experience, ask questions. You're getting better at prompt engineering. You have Copilot for M365, lives in the Office products that we use today very heavily. So again, you have that integration AI in that productivity space. Now, one thing's for sure though, and this may be a huge part of a organization's AI initiative. It may consume a lot of that. But what we can expect out of these tools is a very out-of-box experience. We shouldn't expect to be able to fine-tune the controls here, right? That's not really what it's for. It's really to get started faster in our day-to-day activities. However, it's not the only tools, right? As you navigate up that stack, right, you start to gain some of those capabilities of fine-tuning, right? You start to have a little more control. Call this the hybrid layer, right? It's not out of box. It's offering a little more capability. So like we start to look at things like, oh, well, how can we customize these LLMs a little bit? How can we integrate AI in our automations? How can we integrate it in application development or even create our own agents with Power Platform and Copilot Studio? So those are now offering another subset of AI capabilities to take it to the next level.
Yeah, and what I like to think of that is that I'm looking at a very specific skill. I'm looking to do something very focused, very specific. So a great example is an HR bot, right? So being able to create an agent in Copilot Studio that's focused on HR topics. So I could come in and it'll engage me and it'll ask me about what I want to talk about. Do I want to talk about benefits? Do I want to talk about paid time off policies? Do I want to ask questions about FMLA? Very, very specific topics that I want to use. And then once I've selected which branch I want to go down, I now have selected a very specific model to answer some of those questions and get the responses that I'm looking for. So now I'm curating that data instead of just going out and looking at the entire Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And I could do that and it might work, but this bot will actually ensure that it's a little bit more targeted. And I like that approach because not only does it allow me to get to my answers faster, but by leveraging it in Copilot Studio, I may be able to share that out with a broader audience that maybe would not be considered for a Copilot for Microsoft 365 license. So for example, if you're in a manufacturing environment, people that work on the shop floor, they're not going to get Copilot for Microsoft 365. They're just not, because their job isn't creating content. Their job is running the machines and repairing them and managing the production process. But they may come to a kiosk machine and have to ask questions about their benefits. So being able to leverage that is really great. So Copilot Studio not only allows that customization and that free access for your Copilot for Microsoft 365 users, but also gives you an opportunity to extend that at a really reasonable price point to broader audiences within your organization. And I think that's great.
I would agree that seated capability there as a benefit to Copilot from 365, having Copilot Studio is going to be huge. Like, it's already starting to make huge waves. We talked to a lot of customers about this. We help a lot of organizations find that benefit in Copilot Studio. But I think this is really starting to be the wave of the future. I mean, speaking of waves, like, this was front and center for me. When we think about wave 2, we've gone now from, more or less the predictive analytics to generative AI, and now this thing called agentic AI. And I think the next big thing is going to be that content generation is not enough. What are we going to do with that? What action can we take on that content? And, we just returned from the Power Platform Conference, and the big thing there was these agents that are working in the background, working for you, taking action, integrating in things like Power Automate, and running tasks in the background. So I think this journey, although it seems like we're just getting started, it is accelerated very quickly into that agent space. So that's huge.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to really streamline the experience for people as they're trying to figure out how do we find more efficiencies is, even if it's a manual aspect of things, to be able to do things like, oh, do I want to go ahead and create tasks for this? Or maybe I'll just create a task automatically as part of a meeting recap out of a Teams meeting. So definitely some great stuff I see coming down the pike with that.
All right, so let's run through how SHI approaches AI. For example, take our Copilot for M365 Enablement Professional Services offering, which is delivered over 4 phases. First, we need to understand the why. What is the intent? What are you looking to solve? What are the different personas that are going to emerge at the individual, business, and enterprise level? What work do today's challenges require? What are the processes and tasks that should be targeted? And what is the current resource consumption? Then we move to designing an approach that is unique to you. But the design is very much dependent on the data estate. So we need visibility into the broadly shared sites, conversations, files, folders, quality of the data. Also, what is the adoption health of 365 today, and what are the user behaviors and norms? Who is exhibiting the right collaborative behaviors? So how does all this happen? By using a secret weapon called Microsoft Graph. So now that we've done the legwork, we can get Copilot for M365 in the hands of users, but we can't stop there. We need to understand the return at first launch. Where did it hit? Where did it miss? Where did expectations fall? And we start to qualify and quantify the value of the tool. We can also gain a lot of insight on where we need to focus our efforts in the next phase: training, adoption, and change management. As we mentioned earlier, some of us have had the same workflows for nearly 40 years. It's not an easy habit to break. So yes, we need the prompt engineering. We need the training on the tool itself. And we need training on 365, relearning a few best practices for the Microsoft 365 suite. But we also need to create change. Help truly adapt and adopt. It's one of the reasons why these engagements have a technical resource, but also training resource and an adoption change management specialist. So product purchase doesn't equal a practice. AI takes some finesse and hard work to truly integrate and bring value.
I appreciate all of you joining us here. I hope that you found a lot of the session content valuable, as well as the other sessions here at Ignite. We're excited to see what all these capabilities and the evolution of from Copilot M365 to predictive analytics, even to AI, ML, and Azure OpenAI. We're excited to see how the capabilities will evolve, and how we can use those technologies to solve what's next. Thanks, everyone.